Good evening. Welcome to River Community Church. My name is Sam. I'm one of the pastors here. Thrilled that you're here with us this evening. If you haven't been with us for a while, if you're new here, what you need to know is that we're in a series right now we're calling The 7 Deadly Sins. It's super ominous and terrible and awesome. It's been fun to talk about it. We've been addressing some of these different things that are these 7 deadly sins. But before we get into it, every week we just want to go over a couple of quick things. For starters, there's no place in the Bible where you'll see the 7 deadly sins listed in order. These are the 7 terrible things. So it's not that. And it's really important for us here to speak straight from the Bible. So we want to make sure that you know that. And why we are able to do it still is that each of these sins is addressed in the Bible in detail. So we get to know what they're all about. We get to understand them through the biblical lens. And I think that's really important to know. As we do that, what you need to know about the list is that in about 580 AD, Pope Gregory I was the one who finally said, hey, these are the 7 deadly ones, or the 7 cardinal ones, and that's where it dates back to. That's what the list originates with. And as we walk through each of these sins, what we're doing is we're not looking at hey, what's Uncle Joe's sin, or what's my neighbor's sin, what's the person that I know next door to me who always does this one thing. That's not the purpose of what we're doing here. The purpose is to find these spots, these things that we struggle with, and I struggle with all of these, and I'm guessing maybe you do too. We're finding those places that we can begin to see how God can lead us through this stuff. Actually, Barry Zabel, our lead chaplain here at RCC, he was talking last week about the sin of greed, and he was talking about how it's not something that's condemning. We're not supposed to be condemned by God. We're supposed to be convicted. And condemning is something that's not good. It's something that kind of leaves us down in the dumps. Convicting is something that God does that helps us to move past it and move forward, and that's an awesome thing. So, maybe you are here and you received Pastor Mike's email this last week. He typically sends one out every week. If you didn't get it and you want to get those emails, in front of you is a connection card. You can put your name and email address on it, and you can get those every week. But he was talking about how this is one of those topics, the one that we're going to talk about tonight, that's kind of an untouchable one. He nor I had, we think, ever heard a message on it or a sermon on it in all of our years of going to sermons. I've been doing it for a long, long time, and I've never heard it. It's kind of this interesting, untouchable one. So we're going to get to it in a moment. But before we get to that, we're a place that doesn't like to take ourselves too seriously. We take God very seriously, but we don't take ourselves too seriously. So we have a whole other list of sins to talk about, and those are the 7 Wisconsins. So we're going to get into that. We've been doing this every week. We'll have a little bit of fun with it. But the first one is this. Number 7 this week. Thinking the ice bowl is a bowl of ice. Number 6, referring to the Green Bay Packers as they instead of we. That is not okay. They are we. We are part of their team. Then number 5 is drinking almond milk. My wife's laughing because she drinks almond milk. Sinning, sorry. I can't believe I just did that. Anyways, number 4, driving past a garage sale or flea market without stopping. You're not supposed to do that in Wisconsin. Number 3, forgetting to shovel a path to your grill in April. Or maybe May, who knows? We're just not counting our chickens till they're hatched this year. Number 2 is thinking the seasons are winter, spring, summer, and fall when they're actually hunting, packers, winter, and road construction. And the number 1 Wisconsin for this week is leaving a can or pack of soda or pop, whichever you refer to it as, in the car overnight in January. So I know maybe you've experienced that and had to clean up for a while afterwards. Those are some fun ones. We've got 2 weeks left. If you have a really great Wisconsin that you want to share with everybody, feel free to toss on your connection card. We'll maybe share that over the next couple of weeks. So, back to the serious business. This week, we address the sin of gluttony.
Tried.
For some reason, this week, that song has been playing through my head all week because for some reason it makes me think of gluttony. I can't get any satisfaction. And what's funny about that is I think this is something that I think we all deal with. This is something that we're all aware of. It's not necessarily a popular topic to talk about. Most people, when they think of it, they immediately go to the topic of food. But gluttony is not about food. It's not. It's about all kinds of different things. Sometimes it finds itself there in food, but that's not the thing that is the sole area of where it comes from. So as we're talking about this topic of gluttony, we have to ask ourselves, what is it? What is gluttony? And as we define it, the simplest definition we can get to is this. Gluttony is excessive indulgence. Excessive indulgence. A word that helps me kind of get my mind around it is the word of binge, right? Have you ever heard of binging on something? You can binge watch Netflix. Has anybody ever done that? Binge watch a TV series or a TV show. You can binge eat all the chips and enjoy all of those, all the chips in the pantry. That's one of my favorite things to binge on. You can binge exercise. There are people that they just can't get enough. They feel like there's a feeling that they can get from it, so they binge on it. They do as much of it as they can. You can binge shop, right? You can go and even though your closet or your garage, guys, this is you too, is all full, you still want to go and find that other piece of clothing or that tool that you don't have. This is something that, or you do have, but you want a different one. That's probably more so it. This is something that we have, right? This is something that we deal with. Maybe you've even heard the phrase, a glutton for punishment. You can be a glutton with basically anything. Because when you really break it down, gluttony is any attempt that we have to milk as much satisfaction as possible out of something you believe will give you pleasure or happiness. You're trying to pull every last bit out of it. Now, maybe you're thinking, how is that different than some of the other 7 deadly sins? Like, for example, lust or greed. How are these any different? Because they kind of start to sound very similar as you think about it. But as you look at this bag of Doritos, we can kind of understand it this way. If lust is the fact that you guys all want this bag of Doritos, but you can't have it because I have it, that maybe would be a form of lust. You can't have something that you want, and so you want it, but you can't have it. Greed would be saying, oh, I want those bag of Doritos, and then I also want to go down to Webster's down there and buy every single bag of Doritos that's on the shelf, plus a few other ones that sound pretty good too. That would be greed. Gluttony is opening this bag of Doritos up, sitting on your couch, and in 4 minutes eating the entire bag of Doritos. That's the difference. And I use Doritos because this is the one that I do. This is my one. I love Doritos. If I open up a bag of chips like Doritos, I literally, if I don't have any kind of censorship going on, I will eat the entire bag of Doritos in like 5 minutes. It just goes right in. I don't know how it all fits, but it does. Although I do, because this bag is never like on the inside. There's not as many as it looks. Does anybody agree with me on that? Okay. I'm glad we're on the same page. All right. But you look to this thing, right, to satisfy you. You think that the next chip will finally do it. Gluttony is when you can't stop, when it's never enough, when you're unable to ever quite be satisfied, so you just keep going. It's just never quite enough. There's this time, Jesus had been traveling around and teaching and healing people, and whenever he does this sort of thing, people begin to kind of crowd around him. And so there's this particular series of events where Jesus is healing all kinds of people, so everyone is trying to find and be by Jesus. And there's this massive crowd that finds him. And so he begins healing and all these things, and then the day ends, and everybody wants to be by him, but he's kind of exhausted and needs a little bit of time away from everybody. So that night, the disciples go across the lake in the boat. He goes on foot across the lake. That's another miracle. And then he ends up on the other side, and in the morning, everybody who had been with him realized that he's not there. So like, where's Jesus? Where's this guy that was healing everybody? We got to go and find him. And they find some boats, they go across the lake, they find Jesus, and again, they begin to want to be around him. Jesus continues to teach, and the disciples, after a while, they see to Jesus, hey, Jesus, we're in this remote place. We're way off in the middle of nowhere. These people need some food. we need to send them away so they can go and get some food for the evening. And Jesus' response is, hey, you feed them. You feed them. Now, the disciples are a little taken aback by this because they don't have nearly enough money to buy food. But one of them says, hey, here's this boy with 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. And Jesus says, that'll do. And he takes the loaves of bread and the 2 fish. He blesses it, begins to hand it out. Way more than 5,000 people were fed from that small dinner for a boy. Now, that ends. And again, Jesus goes away for a bit, and they continue to search after him and find him. And finally, the people are trying to find Jesus, and they finally find him, and they ask him, when did you get here? How did you get away from us? And listen to what Jesus responds with. Jesus replied, I tell you the truth. You want to be with me because I fed you, not because you understood the miraculous signs. But don't be so concerned about perishable things like food. Spend your energy seeking the eternal life that the Son of Man can give you. For God the Father has given me the seal of his approval. Now they hear this and they still don't quite get it. So these people that are following Jesus, they say, hey, Jesus, can you teach us to do those miracles? Can you teach us to make food come out of nowhere and heal people? And so Jesus, hearing this, he says, you still don't get it. And he responds with this. This is the only work God wants from you. Believe in the one he has sent. And he continues to talk to them. He says to them that he's the way. He says he's the bread of life. He's the one who satisfies, who offers the best and eternal life. Everything else falls short, but he satisfies. And when he finishes saying this stuff, the people begin to be really cautious of him. They don't quite understand what he's saying. It's a little bit too much. And so he's not giving them food. He's not healing anybody. And he's saying these weird things about following him and how he's the bread of life. And then this happens. At this point, many of his disciples turned away and deserted him. Jesus had stopped giving them what they were after. They were after food and miracles. They were milking Jesus for what they thought he was worth. And when he stopped giving it to them and told them that those things wouldn't really satisfy them anyways, they left. They walked away. Jesus' purpose was not to be a food or miracle dispenser. It was to draw people into a life-changing and eternal relationship with God that really, actually satisfies. But the people didn't want that. They didn't want that. I wonder how many of those people looked back on that day years later and realized what they had given up. Sometimes I think we have to experience life without in order to appreciate and know what we had. We have to go without something to know just how good that thing was. I'm wondering, does anybody know what this is? Right? It's a big jug of water. And you'd say that and you'd be a little bit mistaken because yes, it's a big jug of water, but this is the best tasting water on the planet. Now, I know you might think that's kind of crazy, and if you came up here and you took a drink of this water, you'd think, no, it's not. It's just like every other tap water I've ever had to drink, but I would disagree with you. I would disagree with you because this, to me, is the best tasting water on the planet because whenever I see this, I remember many, many times that I spent out in a field working in the hot, hot sun. And at the end of a row of whatever we were working on, I'd get to the end and I'd see this thing and it'd be like heavenly sounds coming down and like light shining on this thing because this looked amazing, right? It's this beautiful jug of the most delicious water ever. And so I'd take a big sip and it would satisfy my longing to have some water in me more than anything ever. I could be nourished or I would be hydrated, and it was awesome. It was the most amazing thing. So for me, that is the most amazing water on the planet. Water tastes the best when you realize how much you need it. When you recognize your need for something, two things happen. Number one, you recognize how good something is, especially if you'd been taking it for granted. And number two, you experience it with more gratitude. You're thankful for it. Like, man, this is the most amazing water because if I didn't have this, it would be really rough right now. It's such a gift. And this actually brings us to the first way that God can help us overcome gluttony, and that's this: going without for a defined period of time. That's the first way that we can overcome gluttony, going without for a defined period of time. It's also kind of known as fasting. Now, fasting would maybe add a couple of other components to this. So just because you go without doesn't necessarily mean you're fasting, but in this case, it can be very similar. And what's great about this is that this isn't one of those things that Jesus, well, he doesn't really do this, but it's not one of those things that Jesus preaches at us to do. Like, you got to do this. It's not what he does. Jesus did it himself. It was a model for us. Early on in his ministry, Jesus went into the wilderness to be tested. So he spends 40 days and 40 nights out in the wilderness without food or drink, and there's nothing to eat, nothing to drink. And then at the end of those 40 days, there's this tempter that comes. And the tempter, do you know what the first thing he tempts Jesus with? The very first thing he does is he says, hey, Jesus, you're hungry. Your stomach is really ready for some food. There's some rocks over here. You're powerful. Why don't you just turn those into bread? Why don't you just turn those stones into bread? Remember that song? Can't get no satisfaction. I can't get no satisfaction. We do this all the time, don't we? We don't quite feel right. Like there's just something off, so we grab the bag of chips and we eat it, thinking that that'll make us feel just a little bit better. Maybe that'll satisfy, and when it doesn't, maybe go on to the next thing, or we feel off, so we say we're going to go and exercise and go do another run or go to the gym for a little while. Maybe that'll help us clear our mind and feel better and be satisfied. Or maybe one more show will take the anxiety away, will take the fear of the tomorrow away, or I'll be lost in another world for just long enough that I'll feel better then. And none of those things are bad. Let me be very clear about that. None of those things are bad. They're great and they're fun and they're often super healthy. It's just that they can't satisfy us like we want them to. So this tempter comes to Jesus and he says, go ahead and turn those stones into some bread. And Jesus says in response, it says, but Jesus told him, no, the scriptures say people do not live by bread alone. We need more than food. We need more than entertainment. We need more than activity. We need more than stuff. We need God. Like we need water. It's essential. I don't know if you've ever experienced this, but when you're not terribly thirsty, like you're not like dehydrated or whatever, like anything sounds good, right? A soda, coffee, maybe even flavored water if you're into that sort of thing. Like they just sound fine, right? It sounds like it'll like spice it up a little bit. It'll let me drink it. When you're hot, when you're just terribly thirsty, I ran a race this morning, and it was hot. Like compared to like 2 weeks ago, it's hot outside. And by the end of the race, I didn't want any like flavored drinks. All I wanted was water, because that's what was really going to satisfy me. Sometimes we need to go without to realize just how true that is. It helps us remember that God's the one who satisfies. Going without or fasting for a period can take the power away from that thing that we often think will really satisfy us, when it in fact won't. But just so you know, we're not only going to talk about fasting tonight. Like, you're not all going to be sent out like, let's go fast. You guys can like breathe easy. That's not the thing that is only going to happen tonight. There's another way. There's actually a couple more ways. Have you ever heard the phrase, it's a free country? Raise your hand. Yes? When I was growing up, people would often say, like, it's a free country. I can do what I want, right? I can do whatever I want. It's a free country. That's not actually that new. It's not a new phrase. Some of the earliest Christians actually thought something similar. They would actually say something like, hey, forgiveness from Jesus is free. Let's just keep getting forgiven. They would say, if we sin more, that means more grace, right? And more grace is a good thing, right? So let's just keep on giving God the opportunities to give us all kinds of grace. They would say, Jesus sets us free from the law and rules, so let's really live free, 1960s or whatever, right? You get that picture in your mind. Let's live free. And they're right about a lot of that. Jesus sets us free from slavery to the law. He forgives us. His grace is free. But you can also see how that works itself out. I'll just do whatever I want, whatever I think will satisfy. It's a deadly sin for a reason. This is what Paul, who was writing to the church in Corinth, he said to them. He said, you say, I'm allowed to do anything, but not everything is good for you. And even though I am allowed to do anything, I must not become a slave to anything. Not everything is good for you. We may be free, but that doesn't prevent us from becoming a slave to something. Without realizing it, we can enslave ourselves to all kinds of different things. Which actually brings us to the second God-given way to overcome gluttony. Number 2 is this: moderation. Now I know, that is not exactly a very sexy way of saying it, okay? It kind of sounds like what you heard growing up, but you didn't want to believe is true, because it doesn't sound very fun. It doesn't sound very exciting. Moderation. If that's what you think of moderation, hang with me for just a little bit. It's deeper than that. It's actually a really powerful statement. It directly deals with whether or not we become a slave to something. It actually has to do with this very important word. It's enough. Enough. When Moses led Israel out of Egypt, they crossed the Red Sea and then found themselves. The Pharaoh's on the other side of the Red Sea. They crossed over and they find themselves out in the wilderness and they realize, oh, we got away, but now we got nothing, right? Like we're over here by ourselves. We may as well go back. At least then we had like a full stomach. We had food to eat. But Moses talks to God about this, and God cares about his people, so he sends them this special bread called manna. And so every morning, they were to collect 2 quarts of it per person, no more, no less. So that's what most of them did. This is what it says in Exodus 16. It says, so the people of Israel did as they were told. Some gathered a lot, some only a little, but when they measured it out, everyone had just enough. Those who gathered a lot had nothing left over, and those who gathered only a little had enough. Each family had just what it needed. Did you see the word? It was right in there, right? Everyone had enough. Every family had what they needed. But look what happens next. Then Moses told them, do not keep any of it until morning. But some of them didn't listen and kept some of it until morning. But by then it was full of maggots and had a terrible smell. Moses was very angry with them. It did them no good, right? They were afraid they didn't have enough. They were afraid they wouldn't be satisfied by God, and that fear turned into a terrible smell and maggots. Sounds great. Exciting. Saying this is enough says I'm not relying on food or entertainment or activity or more stuff to satisfy me. It's not the thing that's going to make me okay. So we can actually practice this, right? We can practice saying enough. We can maybe grab a snack and say, okay, this is enough of a snack. And say, all right, that's enough. You can say, as you're scrolling through Facebook on your phone or whatever you scroll on your phone, you can say, all right, I've learned enough about other people's lives. Or I've learned enough about the news. Or I've learned enough about sports. Or I've learned enough about whatever. This is enough. I'm going to move on. You can say enough when you're being active. If you're a fitness person and you're just doing it all the time, if that's something that is consuming you, you can get to the point where you say, I'm not going to actually feel better because of this. I've had enough. Maybe you have a shopping list, right? You define what's enough before you go and shop. enough. Because here's the thing, that as much as our body and our mind tells us that this thing is going to satisfy us, if we just pull a little more out of it, if we find that little bit more, it's going to do it. It doesn't. It won't. And here's the best news about that. Once you stop searching for satisfaction from that thing, like thinking that if I just do a little bit more of it, it's going to finally satisfy, once you stop searching for it, you can actually enjoy it a lot more. Like a whole lot more. Because you'll expect less out of it. And when you expect less out of it, at the very same time, you'll enjoy what you get out of it a whole lot more. That's because the only place where real and lasting satisfaction comes from is God. David, he wrote about it in the Psalms. He says this about God. He said, when you open your hand, you satisfy the hunger and thirst of every living thing. Satisfaction, it comes from God. He satisfies our needs, but that's not it. He also gives us gifts above and beyond our needs. And when we look at it that way, it allows us to do something which just so happens to be the third way God helps us overcome gluttony. But before we get to that third way, I want to talk about a word. There's this word that is kind of a half joke in the office, a word called savory. Does anybody know what savory means? Kind of, maybe. You think you do, you're not sure. Like, is it juicy? Is it delicious? Is it salty? Does anybody feel like they know what it is? Anybody want to holler out? Flavorful. Anybody else? The definition, according to Webster's, is salty and spicy. That's what savory is, right? Aren't you guys all excited about that you know that right now? It's kind of funny, but that's why they call things, so certain things sweet and savory, which, by the way, is like one of my favorite things. Like if you see chocolate or something that's like sweet and savory, like it's got salt and sweetness and then like a little bit of spice, that's amazing chocolate. Like you should get it and enjoy it. That's savory chocolate. And so if you ever want to get me one of those good gifts that we're talking about right now, you can go ahead and do that. Thank you for that in advance. But speaking of good gifts, did you guys know that God is like the originator of good gifts? Like he's known for giving us good gifts. In Matthew 7, it says this, you parents, if your children ask for a loaf of bread, do you give them a stone instead? Anybody? Yes? Yes? No? Okay. Or if they ask for a fish, do you give them a snake? Of course not. So if you sinful people know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your heavenly Father give good gifts to those who ask him? God gives us good gifts. He's known for this. I think the opposite of gluttony isn't moderation. It's also not fasting. Those are not the opposite of gluttony. And both are great practices, great ways to curb your need for gluttony. The opposite of gluttony also isn't savory, but it's close. It's close. The opposite of gluttony is to savor. Savor. To savor means to enjoy it completely. To enjoy it completely. Gluttony is this almost ferocious searching for, right? You're ferociously searching for satisfaction. Savor is a slowing down to experience. It's the difference between being entitled to something so that you take it for granted and use it for all you can get out of it. It's the difference between that and something you're surprised by and grateful for, so you savor it and enjoy it with gratitude. God gives us good gifts, and they're meant to be savored, not expected or devoured. It kind of reminds me of this old commercial. Take a look.
Mr. Turtle, how many licks does it take to get to the Tootsie Roll center of a Tootsie Pop?
I never made it without biting. Ask Mr. Owl.
Mr. Owl, how many licks does it take to get to the Tootsie Roll center of a Tootsie Pop?
Let's find out. 1, 2, 3, 3.
How many licks does it take to get to the Tootsie Roll center of a Tootsie Pop? The world may never know.
So we have Tootsie Rolls for you on your way out tonight. But you can practice, right? You can practice savoring. It can be this picture for you, this practice of savoring something and know it's a little fun gift. And I get to enjoy it completely, not try and get the most out of it the quickest I can. I can slow down and savor it and enjoy it. And we can do the same exact thing in life with the good gifts God gives us. So this week, I have 3 possible challenges for you, 3 ways that God can help you overcome gluttony in your life. The first one is this: choose one thing to go without for a designated period of time. So you're going to say, this is the one thing that I've been kind of struggling with. I'm going to go without it, and I'm going to see how God works through that during this time. So you could choose that one. You could choose this other one, the second one. Instead, you could say, I'm going to practice moderation by saying enough. And I know that sounds really simple, but I actually tried it all week long, and it was actually really powerful. There were several times where I wanted to go for more and realized, I don't need more. That's enough. And it was really great. That'd be an awesome way for you to practice this week. And the last one, the last option for you is choose one thing in addition to the Tootsie Roll Pop, which you're welcome, enjoy that. But then the third one is this: choose one thing to savor as the good gift from God that it is. Because there's so many gifts. There's so many gifts in our lives. It could be a relationship. It could be a home. It could be the fact that it's incredibly beautiful outside tonight. It could be anything. Choose one thing this week to savor. Slow down, enjoy it, experience it. And I think you'll come away realizing just how good that thing is. Feeling so much more appreciative of that thing. So pick one of those. Don't go try and do all of them at once. Pick one of them this week, and if you want to expand on it, go ahead and pick another one next week. But this week, choose one of them and try and do that one. With that, I'm going to close with a prayer, and I'm going to ask God that He would just help us to savor those good things and enjoy those good things, and that we would practice this for ourselves. And if you want that for yourself, go ahead and pray along with me. Dear God, thank you so much that you are the giver of good gifts, and that these things that satisfy us come from you. And so you're the one who satisfies us. God, as we go about our week this week, if anybody here chooses to go without for a period of time, help us to know that we're doing it for you and to really experience that satisfaction that comes only from you, knowing that you're the one who gives it, not anything else. And God, if we're choosing to say enough this week, help us to know how to do that. And then when we say it, help us to really experience just how good it is to know that we don't need more of anything else, we just need more of you. And then lastly, God, if choosing to savor is what anybody decides to experience this week, God, I ask that they would savor the good gifts that you've given them. Savor them in such a way that they see just how many amazing gifts you give all of us, and to experience them and find joy and that goodness that comes from you because of it. We pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen.